She was just a poor village girl, unknown and unseen. But one day, she heard a voice, and that voice would change the future of an entire nation. Her mission was holy, her courage unmatched, but the world wasn't ready for her truth. This is the painful end of a girl who became a legend. In every time of history, there are people who rise with courage, faith, and a deep purpose. Joan of Arc was one such person. She was not a queen or a leader by birth. She was just a simple girl from a poor village, yet she changed the future of her country forever. Joan was born in the year 1412 in a small village called Domremy in northeastern France. Her family were farmers. They worked hard in the fields and lived a simple life. Joan grew up helping her parents. She looked after the animals and did housework. She did not go to school and she could not read or write, but she was full of faith. From a young age, she would often go to church and pray for peace in her country. At that time, France was in a long and terrible war with England. This war is now known as the 100 Years' War. For many years, English forces had taken control of large parts of France. The French people were tired, poor, and afraid. Many towns were burned. Soldiers were everywhere. Even the French crown was not fully safe. The Prince of France, Charles, could not even be crowned king because the city of Reims, where kings were traditionally crowned, was under enemy control. When Joan was about 13, something unusual happened. She began hearing voices. She said these voices were not from people, but from angels and saints sent by God. She later named them Saint Michael, Saint Catherine, and Saint Margaret. These holy voices told her that she had been chosen by God for a great mission. She was to help the Prince of France, lead his army, and free the land from English rule. At first, Joan was afraid. She was just a village girl. How could she lead an army? How could she meet the king? But the voices were clear and strong. Over time, her fear turned into strong faith. She believed deeply that this was her duty. When Joan turned 16, she left her home and went to meet a local French commander. She told him that God had sent her to save France. At first, he did not believe her. People laughed at her and said she was crazy. But Joan did not give up. She kept asking for support. She showed great courage and spoke with such passion that eventually people began to listen. Finally, she was allowed to travel to the city of Chinon, where Prince Charles was staying. When she entered the royal court, Charles dressed like a common man and stood among the crowd to test her. Joan had never seen him before. Yet she walked straight up to him and greeted him as the future king. People were shocked. Charles spoke with her in private. Some say she told him things only he could know. He began to believe that she truly had been sent by God. But before he gave her command of an army, he asked church leaders to test her. They examined her deeply, her beliefs, her character, her background. After many days, they found nothing wrong. They said she was a good Christian and found no sign of evil or lies. Charles finally gave Joan armor, a sword, a banner with an image of God, and a small army. Joan wore men's clothes, not to pretend to be a man, but to protect herself on the battlefield. She was not a trained fighter, but she had great spirit and strong leadership. Her first goal was to save the city of Orleans. It had been under attack by the English for months. The people were losing hope. When Joan arrived, everything changed. She rode on horseback through the city, bringing courage to the soldiers. She led them into battle, carrying her white flag. Even when she was shot by an arrow, she returned to the front and led the final attack. Under her leadership, the French army won. Orleans was free. This was a turning point. People who had lost hope now believed again. They called her the Maid of Orleans. News of her victory spread across France. But Joan was not done. She said that Charles must now be crowned king. That meant going to Reims, still under enemy control. It was dangerous. But Joan believed it was God's will. She led the army through enemy lands. Town after town opened their gates. People welcomed Joan and her soldiers like heroes. Finally, they reached Reims. The city surrendered without a fight. On July 17, 1429, Charles was crowned King of France. Joan stood beside him, holding her banner. Tears came to her eyes. She had done what the voices asked of her, but her mission was not over yet.
If you are enjoying this story, then share your opinion in the comments and support us by sharing so that we can continue bringing you even better stories on time.
Darker days were coming. After the great victory at Rennes and the crowning of Charles as King of France, Joan of Arc believed her mission was nearly complete. But the war was still going on, and parts of France were still under English control. Joan wanted to continue fighting until all of France was free. She believed this was God's will, and she was ready to give her life for it. However, things began to change. Now that Charles was king, his advisors and generals didn't listen to Joan as much as before. Some of them were jealous of her fame, others were afraid of her strong belief in God. They wanted peace through political talks. Joan, on the other hand, believed that action and faith were the true path forward. Still, Joan led several more campaigns. Some were successful, but others were not. Her army no longer had the same support from the king, and resources were running low. In May 1430, while trying to defend the town of Compiègne, Joan was captured. It was not the English who caught her at first, but their allies, the soldiers of Burgundy, a group fighting against the French king. Joan fought bravely, but there were too many enemies. She was pulled off her horse and taken prisoner. The people of her town cried. They had trusted her. Now she was gone. The Burgundians kept her in chains and later sold her to the English for a large amount of money. The English were happy to finally have her. She had embarrassed them in battle, and they wanted revenge. Joan was taken to the city of Rouen, where she was put on trial. The English wanted to destroy her image. If they could prove she was a heretic, someone who falsely claims to speak for God, they could turn the people against her and also weaken King Charles. They said he had been crowned with the help of a witch. The trial was led by churchmen who were chosen by the English. It was not fair. Joan was kept in a dark, cold prison. She was always watched. She was not even kept in a church jail, but locked in a military cell, guarded by men. She was only 19 years old. Day after day, they questioned her. They asked her tricky questions to confuse her. But Joan stayed strong. She said again and again that the voices she heard were from God. She said she followed his commands and never harmed anyone without reason. She said, "All I did was by the command of God." One thing the court focused on was her wearing of men's clothes. Joan wore a soldier's uniform to protect herself. She had worn it in battle and in prison. The church court said this was wrong. Joan explained her reasons, but they did not listen. They also said she was guilty of claiming to hear divine voices. Joan told them she had never lied about the voices. They had guided her, helped her, and gave her courage. Still, the judges wanted her to say she was wrong. They threatened her with death. After months of pressure, fear, and harsh treatment, Joan finally signed a paper saying she would stop wearing men's clothes and would obey the church. For a moment, she gave in. She was tired and alone. But a few days later, she changed her mind. She said she had lied out of fear. She took back her words and said she could not deny what she had seen and heard. She began wearing her soldier's clothes again, not as a protest, but to protect herself from the male guards in prison. This was enough for the judges. They now said she was a relapsed heretic. The punishment for this was death. On the morning of May 30th, 1431, Joan was taken to the market square of Rouen. The square was full of people. Some were silent, others cried. She was tied to a wooden stake. The firewood was ready. As the flames rose around her, she prayed. Her last word was, "Jesus." People watching the execution were deeply moved. Even one of the English soldiers said with tears, "We have burned a saint." The man who lit the fire walked away, shaking with fear. Joan was only 19 years old when she died. But her story did not end there. 25 years later, the church reopened her case. After long study, they found that her trial had been unfair. In 1456, she was officially declared innocent. Her name was cleared. The church admitted that a great injustice had been done. In 1920, almost 500 years after her death, Joan of Arc was declared a saint by the Catholic Church. Today, she is one of the most loved and honored saints in history. Joan's story is not just about war or religion, it is about courage, truth, and standing strong for what is right. She was poor, young, and untrained, yet she followed her faith and stood before kings, led armies, and gave her life for her people. Her legacy lives on. Statues of her stand in cities around the world. Books, films, and songs tell her story. She is remembered not just as a warrior, but as a symbol of faith, bravery, and sacrifice. Joan of Arc proved that even the smallest voice, when guided by truth and belief, can change the course of history.